This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Hey guys, Big Paul here today, and we are going to talk about how to weigh and measure your food. I just assumed that everybody knew how to do this, and I've had several of my clients reach out to me asking me how they weigh the food out to match the macros that I put on my diets. When I write up diets, I usually give guys macros. I don't give them specific foods to eat at each meal. The reason I do it this way is so that they have flexibility on what foods they are eating with the meal. It's sort of an if it fits your macros type plan within the parameters of an approved food list that I give my clients. I try to give people maximum flexibility to eat, and I also want to teach them how to plan their own meals, and I felt like this is the best way to do it. But I think I assume too much that most people understand how to measure food and they want things laid out for them. So I'm going to go into detail on how I go about measuring and weighing my food. It's my way. I'm not saying it's the only way or it's the right way, but I have been able to get ripped and I have been able to get big using this methodology. And we are going to dig into it in just 1 second. All right, so first things first, the big question I always get from people is, do I weigh my food raw? Do I weigh my food cooked? Or does it even matter? And I'll tell you how I differentiate between the two. And I'll tell you why I do it this way. If I'm cooking food in bulk, I weigh it cooked. And the reason I do that is because dividing out the math on weighing out everything pre-cooked for a post-cooked weight is just a pain in the ass. I prep my meals one at a time, and then I just weigh the cooked food out when I'm prepping each meal. So if I'm making 6 meals for the day and it requires 160 grams of chicken, I just weigh the cooked chicken out, put it in the meal. I find that to be easier. Now you can do whatever you want, but that's how I do it. If I am not cooking in bulk and it's things that aren't easily measured, I will use the pre-cooked weight. So for an example, if I'm eating oatmeal, sometimes I eat oatmeal for breakfast. I'm not going to fix up enough oatmeal to make 5 servings of oatmeal because oatmeal is nasty when you reheat it. You just make it as you eat it. So I weigh the oatmeal out pre-cooked. Cream of rice, same thing with cream of rice. I only make cream of rice as a per serving thing. I don't eat cream of rice 6 times a day. I might have it for breakfast or something like that. And when I do the cream of rice, I weigh it out pre-cooked. Now rice, on the other hand, when I cook rice, I cook a shit ton of it. I make a big pot in my rice cooker, my awesome Zoe Jirushi rice cooker. If you don't have one, you should pick one up. It's the best fucking rice cooker out there. But I make a bunch of rice at one time, and I'm going to measure the rice out at the cooked weight and portion it out into my meals. So if I'm making chicken and rice, I'll put my chicken in, weigh it. I'll put my rice in, I'll weigh it, and then put a tablespoon of olive oil or whatever I'm doing with it in there. That's how I do it. So I go for whatever is the easiest and most pain-free way of measuring out my food. Now, the key here and the part that most people miss is being consistent with your methodology. So if you weigh your food out one way, make sure you do it that way all the time, and you're going to have better results if you do that. So second, another thing that I get people asking questions about all the time, and they get themselves so confused with, is do I weigh out and measure, or do I account for, I guess is a better way to phrase it, do I account for indirect macros? And now what I mean by indirect macros is that if I'm using an avocado as a fat source and there's 2 grams of carbs in that avocado, If I'm using rice for a carb source and there's like 3 grams of protein in the rice or whatever it's in it, do I count that? And the answer is no. And the reason I don't count it is because it's inconsequential and it just adds additional complication to measuring things. And I've seen there's no extra benefit for doing so. It's just more work for no additional benefit, in my opinion. Now, you can argue with me. People are going to say, well, those calories count. Yes, they do count. I get that. I don't disagree that they don't count, but it's relative. So think about it this way. If I cut my rice in half, it is a relative reduction in my rice, and whatever inconsequential amount of secondary macronutrients are in there doesn't really matter. They're going to proportionally lower. So if I'm trying to create a deficit and I'm reducing my rice by 50%, that's all that matters. It's the ratios of things. Same thing with meat. If I'm eating an extra lean piece of meat, like a chicken breast, I do not count the 3 grams of fat. So I only count direct macros, what I consider direct macros. So if I'm eating a protein source, I don't bother accounting for the fat that's in it if I'm eating a lean protein source. If I'm eating something that's super fatty, then I might try. Another reason for that is meats, cuts of meat, accounting for the fat that's in it is almost impossible. It's not like this stuff is manufactured in a lab or in a factory like other foods would be, such as a box of cereal where they have a prescribed amount of fat in each box. It's going to be consistent and accurate. That is not the case with meat. When they're grinding up the hamburger in the butcher shop, the butcher's not going through and weighing everything out and calculating and using spectrum analysis and all that. You know what the butcher does? I have a friend of mine that was a butcher. Actually, my training partner, he worked in the butcher shop at Whole Foods. You know how he said they calculate the fat content in the beef? They look at it. Yeah, that looks like 85, and they throw it in the fucking grinder. That's how they calculate it out. There's no weighing, measuring, or anything going on. They're just guessing. So when things are completely inaccurate like that, there's no reason to account for them. You can't quantify the unquantifiable. You could try if you want, but so moving on to the next thing is the macro data, your source of pulling your nutrients from. So do I read food labels? Do I pull my macro data from apps? And I see people all the time get themselves twisted up into knots. They'll say, well, MyFitnessPal says that 6 ounces of chicken is 50 grams of protein, and then the label says 7 ounces is 50 grams of protein. Which one's right? It doesn't fucking matter which one's right. It's all relative. Just pick one, stick with it. Don't change from day to day. Don't get yourself overly consumed. Once again, it is relative. So if we make a 50% reduction in the amount of food that we are eating, and you have been consistent in your measurement methodology, we know that we have a relative reduction in calories or increase in calories. Now, if your methodology for measurement and your data source for your measurements varies all the fucking time, then it's completely inconsistent. We're guessing. We have no idea. So there's only so accurate you can get with this stuff. And the stuff that we can't quantify with accuracy, we just don't bother with. Or the things that are statistically insignificant, if I can say it, we don't bother measuring. Like, who gives a fuck about the 2 grams of carbs in an avocado? It doesn't matter. It's mostly fiber anyway. Who gives a crap about a couple grams of protein in some vegetable source? Doesn't matter at the end of the day. Really. And then it varies from source to source anyway. Like I said, it's not like people are making avocados in a lab. It's not like people are making ground beef in a lab. So pick one source, stick with it. Pick one style of measurement, stick with it. So people also ask me, well, how do I measure my food? Does it matter if I'm measuring out in ounces or grams or measuring cups or measuring spoons, or do I just eyeball things? Yes, I weigh everything. I used to use measuring cups and measuring spoons. I still do use sometimes I'll use measuring spoons for like oil or something, but I have found the most accurate way to measure is to weigh things. And not only to weigh things is to use grams as a measurement. And grams are more accurate than ounces because it's a smaller unit of measurement. And a smaller unit of measurement means less variation. Okay, so there's, you can measure in ounces, that's fine. If you're not contest prepping, honestly, it's probably doesn't matter. I sometimes will use a measuring cup or eyeball stuff in the off season. I'm pretty good at eyeballing stuff. I think I am very good at it, but there were studies done that showed that most Americans, I'm trying to remember the exact stat on this, but they took a group of overweight people and had them estimate how much food they were eating, and they were off by something like 60%. You can look it up on Google. There's been several studies done like this, but there was one where they were significantly off. They severely underestimated the amount of calories they were eating. So the only way you know truly how much you're eating is to actually measure it, is to actually weigh it. So if you're not doing that, you don't know. You just don't know. You're fooling yourself, okay? So you have to measure it. Eyeballing it's not good enough. If you're just somebody who's just trying to get in shape and you've been eating like dog shit for the last few years, just the fact of cleaning up your diet is going to get you in shape, get you in a better place than where you were before. Weighing and measuring is the next step. If you're going to be a physique athlete, you absolutely have to weigh and measure things. And if you're on contest prep, so think about this. I see this in contest prep all the time. A lot of times people will just eyeball things like peanut butter and oil, which are extremely calorie dense. If there's anything you shouldn't be eyeballing, it's the calorie dense stuff. If you're off a few grams on your rice, it's not that big of a deal. You might make 20, 30 calories difference if you're off a few grams. If you're off a few grams in weight measurement of peanut butter, I mean, they could be like 100 calories. So I think, I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. I think something like 10 grams of peanut butter or 14 grams, I don't recall exactly, is 100 calories. So it's very, very, very small margin for error. And most people, what they identify, I stopped using tablespoons because what I used to think was a tablespoon was actually 2 tablespoons. And I would speculate the average American probably is the same way. What they think is probably a tablespoon is probably more like 3 tablespoons. So you're talking about the difference between 110 calories and 330 calories. And if you do that a few times a day, you're all of a sudden you're at 500 calories a day, and there's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. So over the course of a week, if you're off 500 calories a day just from eyeballing shit, which is pretty small, it's just a few tablespoons of peanut butter being off in your measuring method, then you're gaining a pound of fat, or you're staying in that neutral, or you're not losing that pound of fat, whatever your current given caloric intake is. So that's how small the margin of error is. You got to be careful. And if you're on contest prep, you have to weigh and measure everything. You have to be accurate. Now, I go back to it. The rule here is to be consistent. Be consistent in your methodology. Be consistent in your data source that you're using for your measurements. Be consistent in your whether you're weighing raw or cooked, depending on the type of food that you use, as long as you're consistent. So that way, when your coach lowers your calories, let's say he lowers your carb consumption by 20%, your reduction of measurement should be corresponding 20%. So it doesn't really matter what the data source is, as long as it's consistent. As long as it's consistent. All right, guys, that's all I got for you on this one. I'm sure some people are going to think I'm completely wrong about this, but I'd love to hear from you and why you think I'm wrong. I take commentary from anyone, whether you agree or disagree with me. That's how we get better. We learn from each other, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you guys for watching. For coaching or consultations, head over to www.anabolicbodybuilding.com to book your spot today. I can help you with optimizing hormones, fat loss, muscle gain, physique, athletic performance, nutrition, and health. For more information, shoot me an email at bigp3rd@gmail.com.